All right, I see some comments here. Excellent. Thank you very much. It's only a 30-minute presentation, and we have a lot of things to cover, so we'll get started. And once again, for those who have just joined, thank you very much for attending the session today. And I'll get started with a quick overview about who we are and what we do. My name is Logesh Balasubramaniam, and I'm the Managing Director at Spear MC Consulting. And we are essentially an Oracle Platinum partner, and which pretty much entirely focused on PeopleSoft applications. We offer end-to-end a full suite of services for PeopleSoft customers, regardless whether you're running your application on-premise or you're evaluating moving to the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. One of our key focus areas over the last few years have been around emerging technologies. Even at this conference, we have a number of sessions that are focused on various latest and greatest features that the PeopleSoft application has to offer, things like Kibana Analytics, chatbots, etc., that we have presented on. Even if you have missed some of these items, recordings is always available for you to catch up. With that said, I'll get started with the core content of the presentation today. I'll start discussing the use case. What is the business problem that we are trying to solve here? And what are the available options in PeopleSoft for you to address those items? How you go about doing that? And finally, also show you a quick walkthrough of a proof of concept that I have set up in terms of to show how it's been done in PeopleSoft. All right, so the first item in here that I want to bring up is specifically in the current year 2020, with majority of the workforce now working from home, not in office, there is an increased need for more frequent engagement with employees in the organization. And we have seen some of our customers using different ways to do it, things like survey monkeys or other ways of running surveys with employees about returning to office, etc. Now, all of those functionalities can be easily implemented using the delivered frameworks within PeopleSoft without having to do a lot of technical work or building something from scratch. There are easily configurable functionalities available to provide that sort of capability within PeopleSoft itself. So the use case that I'm discussing here is how to create a simple survey that you want to publish to your employees, managers, the entire users of your HR application, about what are their thoughts about returning to office, a very functional and comprehensive survey that you want to get your employees' opinion about returning to office. Now, though this is one example, the frameworks that we are going to discuss today are part of the enterprise components functionality. So it's available as part of all the PeopleSoft applications like finance, ELM, HR, etc. So you could use the same process to deploy surveys across all these applications relating to any specific business function that you are trying to achieve. Along with this questionnaire survey, I also want to discuss about the acknowledgement feature in PeopleSoft that goes in very handy with the survey itself. So typically, when you run a survey, you want to make sure the input that you receive is well thought out and is made. In some cases, like coronavirus situation, you may want to employees to acknowledge and declare something. So acknowledgement frameworks comes in very handy along with the surveys. And another important reason I included this is, regardless of these surveys, let's say you have a scenario where you want to just publish some information to your employees and get them to review and acknowledge that, the process that you would do would be very similar to what we are going to discuss today. So it won't consider the questionnaire framework, but it will be the acknowledgement framework. So I'm going to cover both of that today. So even if you're not wanting to run a survey, but just let's say you have a new IT policy or a new data security policy that you want to publish globally to your organization, and you want every employee to review and acknowledge that. So you can follow the same process of our deployment that we're going to discuss here using the acknowledgement framework. So we'll cover both those items in this session. So as I was listed down on the agenda slide, there are going to be three different frameworks that we are going to cover, and each of them has a specific purpose. The first couple of them, the questionnaire and acknowledgement framework, are entirely configuration driven. very easy to understand and start using. Business process analysts, functional users can easily get that going. The third one, the activity guide framework, is a lot more comprehensive and elaborate. And that is the activity guide framework is the one that binds all of this together. When you want to set up a questionnaire, when you want to set up an acknowledgement, the way you take those features to your users is through the activity guide framework. That needs a little bit of a technical activity up front before the functional users can start using it. But we will see all of those things one by one. To start with the questionnaire framework, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in terms of slides, so I want to quickly give an overview and move on to the demo. It's only a 30-minute session. So what I have done here is I have provided a link on each of the page to directly take you to the specific sections in the people books where you would have more detailed information about how to set them up. So questionnaire framework, it is a framework, it's quite a comprehensive framework that allows you to build surveys from scratch. And most importantly, once you have built something, there are multiple ways you can reuse them in future as well. As delivered, this framework is already used in various activity guides like onboarding, offboarding, life events, open enrollment, all of these items. So there are a lot of delivered functionality that is already using this. Now, if you have a complete new requirement, you can create your own questionnaires and deploy it as well. Next is acknowledgement, very much similar to the questionnaire framework, much simpler in terms of creating and deploying acknowledgements that you can use across the system. As delivered, acknowledgement is also used in the onboarding, offboarding activity guides and benefits as well. Both these items, the questionnaire framework and the acknowledgement framework, are, as I mentioned before, cannot be deployed standalone. Once you set these things up, you have to sort of bind it or wrap it using an activity guide to make it available for your users, employees, or managers to use. So that's where the activity guide framework comes into play. As I said before, it's a quite comprehensive framework, but it can be a session on its own. It can be a long 3-hour session on its own to cover the end-to-end functionalities of an activity guide framework. To wrap it into this particular discussion, what I'm going to cover is what are the mandatory pieces of it to create an activity guide and how simply you can create one and deploy it to end user. So we'll see just cover the mandatory portions of it. There are quite a lot of optional functionalities available as part of activity guides, which could be a separate session on its own. So that's a brief overview of the 3 frameworks that I'm going to talk about. Now, another thing I forgot to mention, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter those questions in the Q&A section on the right-hand side. It's a very short session, so I will review all the questions at the end of the session. In terms of the deployment process, what I want to cover here is the order in which that needs to be done is being displayed here. I will go through the system and show you how it's being done, but for now, it's just the order that I want to cover. All these 3 items, the questionnaire framework, the acknowledgement framework, and the activity guide, follow a very similar process. So once you learn to do one item, the other items becomes very simple. First, there is a functionality called category. A category defines what is the specific purpose you are creating a questionnaire or an acknowledgement or an activity guide. And once you define a category, you can create multiple templates within that category. For example, let's take life events is a delivered category. And within that category, you have different kinds of life events, like a birth event or a marriage event or a divorce event, etc. So let's say in this questionnaire category, when I'm going through the demo, I'll show you for this particular COVID-19 situation survey, I have created a questionnaire category that's all-encompassing, like operational health and safety. Within that, I can create multiple questionnaires. It could be done at different times. It could be related to different things, etc. So as we go through the process, you will notice all the 3 items, questionnaire, activity guide, and acknowledgement, all starts with a category and then a template, which is for a specific purpose, specific requirement, and then the deployment of it. So we will go through all of these items quickly in the system. Just give me 1 second. While I switch my screen that I'm sharing. All right. Hope you're able to see the PeopleSoft screen now. Let me just see. Just give me 1 second. Excellent. So now, and I'm logging into the latest PUM image 35, but the functionalities that we are talking about, the all the frameworks, the 3 frameworks that I discussed are all available from much earlier versions. I would say maybe around 28, 29, 30-ish. So I've been around for more than a year now, and all of these frameworks are already used in various features like onboarding, offboarding, life events, etc. So if you're using any of those features, if you have deployed any of those features already, then you know that you're already using the frameworks, and we are trying to leverage the same framework to use to deploy other custom business scenarios. So first, I will show you what's the end result of those frameworks or the proof of concept I have set up. So under employee self-service, there is a tile that says COVID-19 return to work. And as you can see, there was one item that was pending my action. And in this case, it shows it has 3 steps, and I haven't completed any of those steps yet. So this is as an employee, I'm seeing a questionnaire, which is step 1 of the 3 steps, and there's a survey to start with. It starts about how comfortable an employee is feeling to return to work. Could be very comfortable or very uncomfortable. In this example, I have given a few scenarios. Like first question is a single choice answer, and a second question is a multiple choice answer. What are my concerns? Maybe getting exposed to coronavirus, or I need to organize childcare before I can return to work because the schools are all online these days. Things like that, or any other concerns, then I want to provide that in an answer, a more detailed answer here. So I'm trying to collect all of that information. And then few other questions related to that, related to how things are going to be done in office, when would I be comfortable returning to office, how many members live in my household, are there any members at an increased risk due to coronavirus. So let's say I'm collecting all of this information in here. And I want to save my changes. So let me save my answers. And let me skip a step here. The step 2 is an acknowledgement that I'm saying that I'm able to return physically to campus, and to best of my knowledge, I do not have any COVID-19 symptoms, and I haven't come into contact with anyone who had COVID-19 in the last 14 days. So this is the acknowledgement framework I spoke about. So we will go through and have a look at both of these items. So I agree to that. And finally, I have also included an attachment step that's entirely optional. So these are all the various frameworks that all easily can be used into the activity guide. It could be acknowledgement, it could be attachments. Let's say you want to make an employee attach a medical certificate, then they could use the attachments framework step in here. So there are various things you can continue to add to the surveys as well. So I think we're already halfway mark in terms of timeline, so I'll quickly switch to showing how to set up this survey. But at a high level, this is how the survey looks, the end result of setting up a survey in PeopleSoft. I see a question here. I see a question that says, are the survey responses tied to the employee submitting them, or can survey be responded anonymously? Now, in this specific scenario, it's part of employee self-service, and it is tied to the employee submitting them. The surveys, the ways to make it anonymous would be, the surveys are going to be captured using the user IDs who are going to be submitting them. So what I would recommend, and if you have a need to run anonymous surveys, the recommendation would be all this information, the questionnaire answers, are going to be stored in the tables that are related to the questionnaire framework. And when you export the data using, let's say, PeopleSoft query, you can leave out the user ID who's submitting that information. So that's a way to make it anonymized, not share it outside. But when the system captures that information, it's going to capture along with the user ID that is going to submit that information. So let me exit the survey. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about 3 different frameworks. All these frameworks are part of the enterprise components, and I want to show you where those things are. So I'm not going to use the tile homepage navigation. I'm going to take you through the detailed navigation. So under enterprise components, as you go down to the bottom of the list, you would see the questionnaire framework, the acknowledgement framework, and the activity guide composer. Let's go through them one by one. Under the questionnaire framework, you see multiple links in here. The 2 things that I spoke about in the deployment process, the questionnaire category and the questionnaires itself. There are a few other things as well. This is all the other 3 items in here are the ones that makes the questions reusable. So let's say you are starting to create a questionnaire or survey from scratch. Once you have started building up some questions, there is an ability to add those questions to a pool. So that it can be reused in the future. Of course, it's entirely optional. The questions could be very specific to that survey, and you don't see a need to reuse it in the future. You don't have to add it to the pool. Same thing with the answer pool. So question pools and answer pools are basically a big list that you want to build over time to reuse questions and answers. Smart answers is a functionality where you group some answers and make it like a combined answer. For example, let's say, how comfortable are you to return to office? There could be 5 choices. I'm very comfortable, I'm not comfortable at all, and everything in between. If that 5 choices of answers are going to be reusable in multiple situations, like how comfortable are you to do something else, like the same answer choices could be same, and those answer choices can be grouped and used together rather than having to add them individually to a question. So basically, a grouped set of reusable answers are the smart answers concept. I'll quickly show the questionnaire category, what is in that. A very simple setup. As you can see here, the delivered system comes with so a common category as an example, then onboarding, offboarding, and benefit surveys. Then I have gone in and created a simple new category for operational health and safety. There is only one questionnaire template. This is related to the questionnaire setup itself, the activity guide that needs to be used to create the question. Just go with the default one. There is only one default template to use here. And then you're basically associating what role would have access to create and maintain these questionnaires under this particular category. So where this becomes useful, that's all part of this setup at this stage. And where this comes useful is, let's say your benefit surveys needs to be maintained by your Ben admins. Your onboarding surveys need to be maintained by your recruiting or HR function. And operational health and safety could be your HR. So you're basically defining a role here to say who can create and maintain the questionnaire, whether they are allowed to add questions, whether they are allowed to add questions or answers to the pool, etc. So basically, you're defining who has control over that particular type of survey. That's all we define at the questionnaire category. Fairly simple to set it up. The second item is the questionnaire itself. Very intuitive to create and maintain. There's not much training needed to be doing this. Let me pick up a questionnaire that I just showed you from an employee side. It gives me a warning that it's already in use. So let me pick that one up. The reason I mentioned it's very intuitive is because you're basically taken through a guided process here to create a questionnaire. It starts with the defining the basic information about the questionnaire, what's the name, what is the description of it, who has access to it, etc. The access item that is mentioned here is access to edit this questionnaire or read this questionnaire. This access of public doesn't mean it's available to all employees. This access controls who can edit this questionnaire within the group that I mentioned in the questionnaire category. So let's say we mentioned benefits admin as the role to have access to the benefit category of questionnaires. Then within that, should that be available to everyone in that role, or should that be available only to private, meaning the person who created this questionnaire? So you have some options there. Then basic instructions about what are the start instructions to the questionnaire and what are the completed instructions. So this was the message it gave me when I saved the questionnaire, when I saved my answers to the survey. So this is where you configure the start and end instructions. And then you go through the most important step, which is adding the questions itself. You can add a questions from the existing list, which is the question pool, or add a new question entirely new. So let me quickly show you the add new question option. I need to get moving fast. We just have another 10 minutes left. So adding a new question, let's say I already have asked questions about the family members, how many, are there any family member at risk? So let me add another question to say, have anyone in the family and make it a single choice question. And these are the smart answers I mentioned about. I could go in and type in yes, current, that's one of my answer. Yes, in the past, and no. So I could manually type in these answers. In this case, there is nothing like a right or wrong answer. We are basically collecting that information. But if there is a need to mark an answer as a right or wrong, depending upon the kind of survey, you can do that. In this case, let's say in the past, then I can enable a comment to say when. Say comment could be just when. Or I could choose from a list of smart answers that are available as well. In this case, I haven't done that. Order field cannot be blank. Let's say put an order. And that gets added to the bottom of the list in here. So basically, building the question sets is a pretty straightforward and intuitive. I don't want to spend too much time there. Once you have created a set of questions, you get to organize it. You get to define the order of the questions here. And most importantly, able to group the questions here. So in terms of grouping the questions, let's say some of my questions are part of activities in the office, and some of the questions are part of activities at home. So let's say I'll create a group that says office and mark the questions that are part of that group. All of these items are office related. Done. Order field cannot be left blank. Let me fill the order again. Done. And those are, so the first group of questions are grouped under office. There are other ungrouped questions. So let me group them under home and select them and give 5, 6. So now they are grouped under the home. So basically there's no ungrouped questions. So system allows you to create and group questions. There are 2 groups. You can then order the groups as you need it. Then it shows the preview of how you have created and grouped those questions. I'm really sorry to rush through this, but as I mentioned before, it's fairly intuitive and we don't have a lot of time. There are a couple more items to discuss. So this is pretty self-explanatory if you walk through the process of creating a question. There are some settings associated to say whether you want to randomize the questions or randomize the answer, whether you want to make it an anonymous, etc. That is also possible in here. And finally, you get to choose whether you want to add these questions or answers to the pool. Let's say you have created a questionnaire, you have created a lot of new questions and a lot of new answers, then you get to add it to the pool as well. And finally, you get to activate this questionnaire. This particular questionnaire is already active, so I don't have to activate it again. It gives me an option to deactivate. All the information so far is already saved, so I can exit the questionnaire here. It's immediately active, so if I go to the questionnaire again, in this case, I've already submitted it, so it's not going to pick up the changes. But it is possible, if it will pick up the changes if I haven't submitted. So it doesn't allow me to edit anymore, but if I hadn't submitted, the changes are already available in here. I should be able to go through and do it as well. Okay, so that's the first portion of it in terms of the questionnaire itself. But the most important aspect here is about how to deploy this information. So once you have created a questionnaire, it is available as part of the questionnaire pool, and you get to preview the questionnaire here. But the most important aspect is how to go ahead and publish it to the users. Now, I'll quickly, before getting into the activity guide, I'll quickly bring about the acknowledgement functionality as well. We just have another few minutes left, so I don't want to spend too much time on the acknowledgement. Similar to questionnaire, you have an acknowledgement category where you define the security of who has access to that group of acknowledgements. Then you get to create and configure the acknowledgement itself. And the acknowledgement that I showed you in the survey is basically built in here, allows you to add multiple sections and basically preview it. So the preview window shows you what you have added. I have added a text content in here. I have added a hyperlink with additional content, and I'm getting a consent here using I agree button. So these are the 3 sections I have added, and all of these items are available for edit. So the hyperlink has a list of COVID-19 symptoms, and it's all being listed here. So when a user clicks on that, this is the information that's going to show up. And then the second part of the acknowledgement is what is the audit information you want to capture. So in this case, I have enabled user ID and timestamp. Optionally, you can enable IP address as well of the user, and the final information here is verify identity. So this makes the user to sign in again to complete the acknowledgement, like a multi-factor authentication. It's not a different factor, it just makes the user to sign in again to complete the acknowledgement. So that's quickly on the acknowledgement. Again, it's used in all the delivered frameworks like onboarding, offboarding, etc. So fairly easy to set this one up as well. Now, going to the third and the most important of items in here is the activity guides. Now, as I mentioned, activity guides, the initial setup of activity guides require a little bit of technical work. Doesn't have to be very elaborate, depends upon how complex your activity guide is. In this case, what I have done is, for this proof of concept, to create an activity guide for the COVID-19 activities, instead of creating it entirely from scratch, where I had to create an app package and application classes to govern that activity guide, instead of creating that from scratch, I have used a delivered utility called clone category. So the clone category allows me to take any of the delivered activity guides like onboarding or offboarding, managing a position, open enrollment. I can pick up any of these activity guides and clone it and save it with a different name. So for this proof of concept, that's all I have done is create a new activity guide by cloning the onboarding activity guide. The reason I have to do it is this is a simpler way you can create without a need for a technical resource to be involved in creating your app packages and app classes. This doesn't make you lose any functionality, but if your activity guide need is more complex and you need more governing rules around the behavior of the activity guide, then it always advised to create a new set of activity guide by cloning these app packages and classes as well. So the most important aspect around activity guide is, once again, who has access to this activity, to the templates created using this activity guide, and more importantly, what are the steps of this activity guide. In this case, the steps that I mentioned are the 3 steps that we have added to the survey. There is an acknowledgement step. So there is a delivered acknowledgement ID. You don't have to change anything here. And that's the acknowledgement step. And in here, sorry. So once you add the delivered acknowledgement step, all that we are doing here is passing the parameter of the acknowledgement ID that I have created specifically for this COVID-19. So the first portion of it is delivered functionality. There is a service ID already available in the system for acknowledgements. We are just saying what is the acknowledgement ID to use. Same is with the questions and attachments. Let's ignore the attachment, it's part of the delivered functionality. With the questions, I'm doing exactly the same thing. There is a delivered service ID for questionnaire framework. And all I'm passing is what is the questionnaire category and what is the question code. So the activity guide framework, the questionnaire framework, acknowledgement framework, everything is pre-built. Since we are only creating a new instance of a questionnaire and an acknowledgement, we are just passing those parameters in the steps as part of the activity guide category. Once I create the activity guide category, then I go in and create the actual activity guide itself, which is using these steps, I'm able to define what is the order of the steps, just exactly like our question category and questionnaire that we created. So in here, in the activity guide template, I get to define, it's a long process, but for this specific requirement, like a COVID-19 survey, it was very simple. All that I need to do within an activity guide is, what is the order of the steps? So there are 3 steps that I have added to the category, and I'm basically choosing what's the order. It starts with a survey, then the acknowledgement, then attachments. You may want to add the summary step, which finally shows what an employee has done as well. That's also an optional item. So you basically do that in here. So you create an activity category, and then where you define all the possible steps. And within the template, you basically define the order of the steps. Once these 2 are done, the activity guide is complete. Now, the final step here is how to deploy this activity guide to the users. And there are multiple ways to go about it. And the one option that I have used here is there is a functionality called template assignment, where you're basically defining rules to say which template to use for which employees. So it could be employees, it could be manager. You may want to roll out for the entire organization, or you may want to roll out for a part of the organization, let's say field workers or office workers. All those rules are basically defined at the template assignment level. In this case, let's say I have used default template assignment. I created a new one, and I'm using a delivered search key. This list of keys are coming from the category that I cloned, in this case, the onboarding category. So I picked up a parameter like organization relationship, and I'm saying EMP, which is all employees in the organization are able to be are eligible participants for this template, which eventually means eligible to fill in this survey. I could use any of these parameters or a combination of them. I could go and add an additional criteria, maybe only a specific company or a department or full-time employees. You could choose any of these items and define your rules to assign an activity guide, category, and template. This is where having a need for multiple templates comes into play. So it could be a same survey, but might have different questions or different steps for different kinds of employees in your organization. This is where the category comes into play. It is one category that could be employee COVID surveys, but within that you have multiple questionnaire templates, you have multiple acknowledgement templates, and you could have multiple activity guide templates as well. To allocate different things for different users. So this is where you'll be doing that. And the final step I have done for this proof of concept is deploy this whole item as a tile onto the home page, onto the Fluid homepage. So in this case, it's COVID-19 return to work. I'm basically saying, picking up a category, and I'm saying what the user can do within the tile. They can view a tile, they cannot start a new activity guide, but they can fill in a guide that has already been published to them. I'm using this template assignment rule. I can choose a tile image, and I'm choosing what role should have access to, and what is the home page to deploy it. And finally, push the button to publish the tile. That makes the tile available on the home page in here. Okay. We have 5 minutes over time, and there's quite a lot of information to cover through. Sorry if I had rushed it too fast, but my information is available in the presentation, so feel free to reach out if you need more specific information. on any items that we discussed. I see another question here. So the second question is very much the same one. The survey responses being tied to employer anonymous. As we saw with the questionnaire setup itself, there is definitely an option for anonymous survey. The information that is tied to the survey itself is going to be the user ID. And I'm guessing in terms of the answers being recorded to a specific user ID, that's going to be definitely recorded in the system. But how you make use of it, what information you want to publish out, and what information you want to analyze can definitely be anonymous. But if there is a little bit more specific you need around that, we can definitely have an offline conversation as well. All right. Are there any final questions before we wrap up? Doesn't look like. Thank you very much, everyone. Quickly switch to the screen sharing in here. And finally, feel free to go in and fill in a session evaluation form as well. And as I mentioned, the contact information is available for you to reach out if you have anything more detailed to discuss. Always happy to help. You have a great rest of the conference. So we're almost nearing the end of it. A great thing about this online conference has been all the sessions have been recorded and made available. Feel free to catch up on any items that you have missed. If not, thank you very much. Talk to you all later. Bye.